It was an ordinary Sunday afternoon. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window, casting soft golden shadows over the worn wooden table. Maria sat alone, a cup of lukewarm coffee in her hand, sifting through an old box of photos that had survived a dozen moves and twice as many storms. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just letting nostalgia do its quiet work. Then her fingers paused. There it was, a photo she hadn't seen in years. Faded edges, a slight tear on the corner, but the moment it captured was eternal. A young boy, no more than 6, smiling shyly into the lens. Her son. His name was Daniel. Maria stared at the photo as if it had just been taken. His face, soft, innocent, untouched by time. But it wasn't just the smile that made her breath catch in her throat. It was the weight of 15 years. 15 years since she had last seen him. Since he vanished. No clues. No ransom, no trace. One moment he was playing in the front yard, the next gone. The police searched, the neighbors whispered, Maria prayed. But the world, cruel in its indifference, moved on. Only she remained suspended in that moment of disappearance. Like a scratched vinyl record, her life played the same note over and over again. What happened to Daniel? She had tried everything. Flyers, news appearances, private investigators, even psychics when logic gave way to desperation. But now, with age drawing gentle lines on her face and grief settling like sediment in her bones, Maria had stopped searching. Or at least, that's what she told herself. She looked down at the photo again. "You were so small," she whispered, as if he could hear her. Then, without thinking, she picked up her phone, snapped a quick picture of the old photo, and uploaded it to a new public group online dedicated to facial recognition for missing persons. It was a long shot, one of many she'd taken over the years, but somehow this time felt different, not hopeful, not logical, just different. She closed her phone, not expecting anything, just another whisper into the void. But the void, it turns out, was listening. Somewhere across the invisible scaffolding of the internet, the photo began to move. Not in the way a living thing does, but with the silent urgency of code. The moment Maria pressed upload, a cascade of protocols ignited. The image, no bigger than a few megabytes, was copied, encrypted, tagged, and dispatched into the vast neural web of a facial recognition engine designed to identify the forgotten. In a distant server farm, rows of blinking machines humming in perfect apathy, the photo was broken down into data points: the curve of the jaw, the distance between the eyes, the shadow beneath the cheekbone. To Maria, it was a desperate gesture. To the algorithm, it was math. As the systems processed the image, comparing it against millions of faces stored in public databases, driver's licenses, school photos, social media posts, security footage, something began to stir. The algorithm didn't see a missing child. It saw vectors, ratios, probabilities, but hidden in the cold structure of code was something profoundly human, a question. Does this face match another? Behind every scan, behind every line of code, there was a silent whisper echoing through silicon. Is someone looking for you? Time is a cruel thief, eroding memory while preserving absence. And yet, data does not forget. Data, once captured, becomes ghostly permanent. The world may bury your name, misplace your story, forget your scent. But a camera lens, once focused, immortalizes. Somewhere in the depths of a security database from a youth detention center in Oregon, a blurry photo of a teenage boy flickered into comparison. The system flagged it, not once, not twice, but repeatedly. A 98.7% match, then a 99.4%, then inexplicably 100%. On the screen, side by side, the old photograph of a smiling 6-year-old, and a grainy surveillance capture of a solemn-faced 17-year-old. The cheekbones, sharper now, the eyes, heavier, but the structure was unmistakable. The computer didn't feel joy, it didn't cry, it didn't understand the gravity of what it had done. It simply logged a match, filed a report, and pinged the volunteer moderators of the database. Back in New Mexico, Maria continued her day, unaware that in a fraction of a second, her reality had quietly cracked open. She washed dishes, watered plants, folded the same shirt she'd folded hundreds of times before. All the while, a message was forming on the other side of the world. A string of words and pixels preparing to realign her soul. In the ancient world, people believed memory resided in the heart. The Egyptians weighed it against a feather to judge your soul. But in the modern age, memory lives in hard drives. It pulses silently behind glass screens and electric hums. It waits, not with emotion, but with precision. Technology does not care, but it remembers. And sometimes that's enough to shake the earth beneath your feet. The message arrived just after dusk. Maria didn't hear the soft chime from her phone at first. The sound was swallowed by the noise of a television playing in the background and the hum of a box fan spinning lazily in the hallway. She was sitting on the couch, a half-empty bowl of soup growing cold in her lap, her thoughts drifting as they often did in the evenings, not quite awake, not quite dreaming, just suspended. When she finally reached for her phone, it wasn't with urgency. It was routine, habit, something to distract the ache of silence. The screen glowed to life, revealing a new notification. Potential match detected. Her thumb hovered over it, confused, uncertain. It took her several seconds to even remember she had uploaded anything earlier that day. And even then she didn't expect much. These systems, she had been warned, often gave false hopes. Matches that weren't real, ghosts stitched together by ones and zeros. But something inside her, the old dormant pulse of maternal intuition, made her tap the screen with more than idle curiosity. The app opened slowly. Her internet connection was never fast. The loading icon spun in circles like a clock winding backwards. Then 2 faces appeared on the screen, one she knew better than her own, her Daniel at 6 years old, with his hesitant smile and soft, curious eyes. The other face was older, sharper, wary, a teenager. His eyes not curious, but guarded. His skin pale under harsh institutional lighting. He looked tired, hollowed out, and yet, God, and yet, it was him. Not a resemblance, not a maybe, it was him. Her breath caught, her hand began to tremble. The phone nearly slipped from her grip as her vision blurred with sudden tears. For a moment her body froze, unable to comprehend the image in front of her, as if her soul needed to buffer, just like the app had. She whispered his name, not the grown version, not the image on the right, but the name as she used to say it, in the mornings before school, in lullabies, in prayers muttered into empty sheets. Daniel. Her knees buckled, and she slid to the floor, the phone clutched to her chest, as a wave of soundless grief poured from her lungs. It wasn't just sorrow. It wasn't just joy. It was everything she had suppressed for 15 years, the guilt, the rage, the unbearable ache of not knowing. It came back in a flood, tearing through her like a storm. How many times had she imagined this moment? A knock on the door, a phone call, a clue. But not like this, not through a screen, not with so much distance between them. She stared again at the boy in the second image, her son, older, wounded by time, but alive, alive. Her fingers hovered over the respond button, paralyzed by the gravity of what came next. Memories began to flicker in her mind, triggered by the image. His 3rd birthday party with the dinosaur cake, the time he skinned his knee and refused to cry, the way he used to sing off-key in the car. She remembered the scent of his shampoo, the softness of his blanket, the quiet way he said, "I love you," as he fell asleep. These fragments of their life together returned with startling clarity, as if they had been waiting, hidden in the folds of time, for this exact moment to resurface. But interwoven with the warmth was pain, the day he vanished, the panic, the police tape, the endless interviews, the empty bed. She remembered waking up some nights gasping for air, convinced she'd heard his voice in a dream. And now, this. A screen. A face. A possibility too fragile to hold. The app offered her options: request contact, submit DNA for confirmation, notify authorities. Each option felt like stepping onto thin ice. What if it wasn't him? What if it was? The weight of both questions was unbearable. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat in silence, phone in hand, staring at the photos, comparing them, memorizing the contours of his older face, counting the freckles, the shape of his nose, searching for something familiar in the way his eyes looked away from the camera. She thought about what those eyes had seen, what kind of life he had lived since she last held him. Was he safe? Was he loved? Did he remember her? Did he blame her? She whispered to the screen, hoping somehow he could hear it. "I never stopped looking, not really." And then, with shaking hands and a heart on fire, she pressed request contact. The moment she pressed request contact, the silence in the room thickened as if the very air had paused to bear witness. The screen displayed a simple message: "Your request has been submitted. A mediator will review the case." Nothing more. No celebration, no confirmation, no warmth. Just the sterile response of a machine that did not understand the gravity of what had just transpired. The kind of message one might receive when ordering a package or resetting a password. But Maria knew this was not just data, it was destiny wrapped in protocol. She sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the screen long after the message faded. A quiet ache began to form in her chest. Not the sharp, immediate pain of loss, but the slow, grinding pressure of waiting. She had waited 15 years. But now that the door was slightly ajar, every second felt unbearable. Every tick of the clock mocked her with the weight of time she couldn't reclaim. Meanwhile, somewhere far from her modest home, the system activated its next phase. Her request was flagged for manual review. A moderator, a young man in a quiet office filled with rows of dual monitors and half-empty coffee cups, received the alert. He clicked on the file, expecting another routine submission. But as he opened the attached images, something shifted in his posture. Even he, numbed by thousands of faces, paused. He recognized the echo between the two photographs. A child's innocence morphed into adolescent weariness. Yet the bridge between them was unmistakable. He exhaled slowly, clicked priority, and began the process. Background check, cross-reference, review of recent custody reports, contacting the agency currently responsible for the boy in the second photo. The chain of procedure was clinical, but beneath each step was a buried question. What happened to this child? And perhaps deeper still, what happens to a soul when it is lost for so long? Back in Oregon, a social worker named Claire received a message from the system. She was accustomed to such alerts, often false leads, well-meaning mistakes, or bureaucratic confusion. But when she opened the file and saw the faces, something clenched in her chest. She had seen that boy. She knew him. He was in their facility. He had arrived 2 years prior with no papers, no family, no clear history. Just a name he claimed wasn't his, a past he refused to talk about. The staff called him Eli, but even that was borrowed. He didn't speak much, never caused trouble. But his eyes held a heaviness that made even the counselors pause. Now Claire stared at the side-by-side images, feeling the ground beneath her assumptions begin to shift. Could it really be? She forwarded the case to her supervisor, then made a note. Subject may be Daniel Morales, DNA match pending. Daniel. That name. A sound buried somewhere deep inside the boy's mind. A name he had once responded to without thinking. A name that once meant warmth, bedtime stories, the smell of cinnamon in the kitchen, but he hadn't heard it in years, not since, well, the memories were scattered, jagged, broken glass submerged in dark water. He remembered running, hands grabbing, doors slamming, voices yelling, and then years of silence, of being passed from one place to another, of becoming invisible. Forgetting wasn't something he chose, it was something he survived. It was safer that way. Back in her kitchen, Maria paced. She hadn't slept. She couldn't eat. Her phone became an extension of her body. Every time it buzzed, her heart leapt. Every moment of stillness became a battlefield in her mind. What if it wasn't him? What if someone had taken her photo and played a cruel trick? What if he refused contact? What if he was alive but didn't want to come back? She tried to brace herself for every possibility, but hope is a dangerous thing. It grows wild once planted, twisting around the heart, refusing to be trimmed by logic. She stared at his photo, the new one, trying to imagine his voice now, his laugh, the way he would say her name if he remembered it. She whispered into the room, "Do you still know me?" And the silence answered, as it always had, with nothing. Meanwhile, in the shelter, Eli sat alone in the recreation room, staring at the muted television playing an old sitcom he didn't care about. Claire approached him gently, a folder in her hands, her voice careful, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "Eli," she said softly, "we think we may have found something, or someone, from before." He didn't respond at first, just looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. She sat beside him and opened the folder, revealing 2 photos. "Do you recognize this?" she asked. He looked. For a long time he said nothing. His jaw tightened. His eyes scanned the images again and again, something flickering in his expression. Not recognition exactly, but a fracture. A crack in the walls he had built around himself. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just whispered one word, barely audible, almost involuntary. "Mom!" And across the country, Maria's phone buzzed again. The message she had been waiting for finally appeared on her screen at 3:47 p.m. It was simple, plain, devoid of drama or punctuation. "He has seen the photo. He said one word, 'Mom.'" Maria read it once, then again, then 10 more times. Her mouth fell open, but no sound came. Her hand moved instinctively to cover her chest, as if her heart might collapse under the weight of that single word. "Mom." It wasn't a full sentence, it wasn't a conversation, but it was the first bridge back across the void. She fell to her knees, clutching the phone like a relic, tears spilling not in sobs, but in silent rivers down her face. How do you respond to that? What do you say after 15 years of absence, silence, longing? She wanted to scream and laugh and pray and run all at once, and beneath the joy, beneath the lightning strike of connection, there was fear. Because if this was real, if he really remembered, then everything she had locked away was now crashing back through her. Guilt, sheer, unbearable guilt, for not saving him, for not being there, for failing at the most sacred vow a mother makes, to protect. She had imagined 100 reunions. None of them looked like this. A text, a whisper, a digital message passed through firewalls and encryption, but it was enough. Enough to awaken the old self. The woman who had once braided his hair, who had waited at school gates, who had sung lullabies to shadows. She typed a response with trembling fingers, erased it, typed again, then finally wrote, "I'm here. I never stopped being here. Please let me see you." She pressed send before she could doubt herself again. In the Oregon facility, Eli sat motionless in the corner of his room. The lights were off, the windows shut, the air thick with the kind of silence that hums. He held the printed photo Claire had given him, the image of his 6-year-old self next to the woman who claimed to be his mother. His fingers traced the edges of the photo like a blind man reading Braille. A storm raged inside him, not of rage, not yet, but of confusion. Recognition came not as a sudden revelation, but like a soft knock at a locked door deep inside his psyche. The name had escaped his lips without permission. It had risen from a buried place, but now it lingered, echoing in his skull. Mum. He hadn't said it in years. He wasn't sure if he believed it yet. The counselors spoke to him gently, told him it was okay to take time. But time had been his only companion for over a decade, and it had not been kind. He didn't know how to feel. He remembered fragments, the color red on a birthday balloon, the taste of warm soup, a woman's voice calling him mi amor, a lullaby sung in Spanish. Were these real or just fabrications stitched from longing? His dreams had played tricks on him before. He had been called many names, placed in many homes, some kind, others brutal. He had learned to forget for survival, to erase himself before others did it for him. But this woman, this face, this voice in the messages, something about her pulled at him like gravity. And gravity, no matter how long you defy it, always wins. Maria sat by the window, her hands shaking as she typed out memories, questions, pleas. Do you remember the turtle nightlight, the blue one you couldn't sleep without? You used to call broccoli little trees. You had a scar on your left knee from when you fell in the playground chasing butterflies. She poured out detail after detail, building a bridge with words, praying he would cross it. No reply came that night, nor the next. But on the third day, at dawn, her phone lit up with a single image, a photo of a scar. Left knee, the same place. No message, just that. Maria wept so hard she thought her lungs might collapse. It wasn't proof in a courtroom, but it was a resurrection in her soul. The process was slow, cautious, bureaucratic. The moderators arranged for a supervised video call. Maria prepared all night. She cleaned the room 3 times. She practiced what she would say, though she knew none of it would survive the weight of the moment. When the screen finally came alive and his face appeared, older, thinner, wary, she didn't speak right away, neither did he. They just looked, a mother and a son, a gap of 15 years filled with silence, now bridged by pixels and blood. Maria smiled, tears flowing. Daniel? He hesitated. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Her body shook with 1,000 unsaid things, apologies, prayers, gratitude, but she held them back. You're alive, she whispered. That's all I ever needed to know. His lip trembled, his eyes welled, and then his voice, rusty, soft, came through. Why didn't you come for me? The question was a blade. It sliced through the reunion like lightning through a quiet sky. Maria swallowed hard, every nerve in her body screaming. She didn't look away. I did, she said, voice breaking. I searched everywhere, but they buried you too deep. I never stopped. The screen flickered slightly. A pause. Then Daniel nodded, not in forgiveness, not yet, but in understanding. An invisible weight seemed to lift. Not disappear, but shift, shared now between them, and in that instant, something began to heal. The first video call ended in silence, not because there was nothing more to say, but because everything that needed to be said was still trapped beneath years of unspoken grief. Maria sat alone in the half-lit room long after the screen went black, her face still illuminated by the ghost glow of the monitor. She didn't move, didn't cry, just sat there, breathing unevenly, as if learning how to inhabit her own body again. On the other side of the country, in a room with sterile walls and peeling paint, Daniel stared at his reflection in the darkened screen, unsure of who was staring back. For the first time in years, someone had called him by a name he had almost forgotten. Daniel. A name soaked in meaning, a name that once carried laughter and bedtime routines and hot chocolate and hands that held his with trust. Now it felt like a relic, something ancient unearthed from beneath layers of dust and trauma. But it wasn't just the name that haunted him, it was her face, familiar yet foreign, warm yet distant. She had smiled at him, she had cried. She had spoken his name like a spell, and still something inside him refused to open fully. Not yet. Because memory does not return gently. It crashes, it floods, it tears down the walls that kept you safe in your forgetting. The following week was a slow unraveling. The moderators encouraged gradual communication, letters exchanged digitally, guided conversations, carefully crafted prompts, but no prompt could touch the wound beneath Daniel's ribs. He read her messages. He even replied sometimes, one-liners, questions, fragments, but there was a coldness in him, a suspicion that had taken root during the long, dark years. He didn't remember exactly how he had disappeared. The trauma had blurred it all. There were flashes, a car, a strange man's hand, a locked room, police stations, foster homes, closed files. He had grown up being told he had no one, that his mother had abandoned him, that maybe she was dead, or worse, that she had given him up. It didn't matter that none of it was true. He had believed it, because when you are a child and the world erases your history, you cling to any story, even the ones that hurt, just to have something to hold. So now, faced with this woman who wept for him, who remembered his scars and his toys and the way he said certain words, he felt more anger than comfort. "Why now?" he wrote in one message. "Where were you when I was locked in that basement?" Maria read those words like knives. Her fingers trembled over the keyboard as she typed and deleted dozens of drafts. She wanted to explain, to scream, to beg. But in the end, she replied with the only thing she had left: the truth. "I didn't know. If I had known, I would have broken down every door. I would have torn the world apart to find you, but they told me you were gone. They gave up, but I didn't. Not in here." She placed her hand over her heart and sent a video with her voice cracking. "Every birthday I baked a cake. I sang to the wind. Every night I left your light on. And when I uploaded that photo, I wasn't hoping anymore. I was surrendering. I thought I'd lost you forever." Daniel didn't reply for 2 days. In that silence, Maria collapsed inward. All the guilt returned in waves. She questioned every decision, every missed opportunity, every time she had allowed herself to rest. She wandered the house like a ghost, touching his old toys, rereading letters, watching the short video over and over. And yet, something inside her refused to die. Because now, there was a thread connecting them again. Fragile, frayed, but real. A thread stronger than silence. She clung to it like a lifeline. On the 3rd day, Daniel wrote, "I used to dream about you, but your face was always blurred, like fog. I didn't think you were real." Maria read the message. Her breath hitched, her eyes welled, and she typed back, "I dreamed of you too, but your voice kept changing, like wind through trees." Then the dam broke. Over the next week they wrote more. Memories surfaced like fragments of broken glass washing up on shore. "Did we have a dog? You called her Nala. You used to feed her cereal when I wasn't looking. I remember a song, something in Spanish. Duermete niño. I used to sing it when you couldn't sleep. I still hum it sometimes, without knowing why." They were rebuilding a mirror, shard by shard. Not to see what was. That image was gone, but to reflect what still remained. And that process, slow and painful, was its own kind of resurrection. Weeks passed, and with each message exchanged, something invisible began to shift. Not quickly, not neatly, but like tectonic plates grinding beneath the surface of everything they thought they had lost. Daniel began to send voice messages. Short, awkward, filled with silence. Maria listened to them like sacred scriptures. She played them back at night before sleep, memorizing every breath, every hesitation, every syllable. His voice was deeper now, of course. There was no trace of the child she used to tuck in. But there was a rhythm, a pattern, a musicality in the pauses that echoed the boy she had once known. It was in the way he said, "yeah," with a slight drop at the end, the way he sighed before saying anything difficult, the way he swallowed emotion mid-sentence. Maria didn't need confirmation. Her soul knew this was her son, not a fantasy, not a ghost, not a mirage conjured by grief, but flesh, voice, breath. Still, the chasm between them remained, not just in miles, but in memory. She wanted to touch him, hold him, smell his hair, feel the warmth of his back when she hugged him too tightly. But he wasn't ready. When the moderators suggested a physical meeting, Daniel recoiled. "Not yet," he said. "I don't even know who I am." And Maria, though it shattered her, understood. Because how do you walk into the arms of someone who represents everything you lost? How do you look at the person who gave you life and not also see the years life took from you? He wasn't ready to be a son again, and she wasn't sure how to be a mother to a man she hadn't raised. Daniel spent his days walking in circles around the shelter courtyard, listening to her messages, but not answering all of them. Sometimes he just needed to hear her voice, to feel the thread hold. There were days he hated her, days he missed her, days he questioned if this was all some kind of elaborate delusion crafted by a part of his brain that had finally snapped. The counselors encouraged him to take his time. He resented that. Time was the one thing no one had ever given him when he needed it most, and now everyone was suddenly patient. He stared at the walls, the same ones that had surrounded him for the last 2 years, and felt the pressure build. He wanted to run. Not toward her, not away from her, just to move, to escape the weight of identity. Every moment brought him closer to a truth he wasn't sure he wanted. Because if he accepted her, if he called her Mom again, then he'd have to acknowledge everything he had endured without her. The beatings, the hunger, the cold nights in strangers' homes, the lies he told himself just to wake up each morning. And if she wasn't to blame, then who was? The system, fate, God, no one. Maria, meanwhile, began preparing her home, not for him, not yet, but for the possibility. She washed the sheets in the guest room twice, not because they were dirty, but because she needed to do something. She took down the framed photo of 6-year-old Daniel from the living room wall, not to erase him, but to make space for who he had become. She sat at her kitchen table every morning with a notebook, writing down everything she wanted to tell him if he ever stood in front of her. Pages and pages. Some days she wrote letters, other days she wrote memories. One day she wrote, "I kept your blanket. It still smells like that lavender detergent you hated." Another day, "When you were 5, you told me you wanted to be a firefighter, but only if they let you save cats." These fragments were her way of building a bridge from her past to his present, even if he never crossed it. It was faith, not in religion, but in relationship, in the fragile miracle of human connection. And then, one night, just past midnight, a message came, just 2 words. "I'm ready." Maria didn't breathe for what felt like a minute. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She had imagined this moment, but never like this. Never so quiet, so casual, so heavy. She wrote back simply, "Tell me when." He responded, "Next Saturday, noon." That entire week became a suspended chord in her life. She barely slept. She reorganized the house a dozen times. She talked to herself out loud, practicing not to cry, not to smother him, not to say too much too soon. But beneath all of that, a single question burned. What if he walks in and I don't recognize him? What if the boy I lost and the man who returns are too different to bridge? What if love isn't enough? Daniel, in turn, packed slowly. The shelter gave him clean clothes, a haircut, a bus ticket. The counsellors hugged him. He didn't hug back. Not out of rudeness, just fear. He didn't know what his body was supposed to do anymore in moments of intimacy. His limbs had forgotten. On the bus, he sat alone by the window, watching the landscape shift. He didn't know what to expect. He didn't know what he would feel, or if he would feel anything at all. He arrived 32 minutes early. He didn't knock. He stood across the street from her house, watching, breathing, trying to remember what a home felt like. Inside, Maria waited in silence, hands folded tightly on her lap, unaware that her son, flesh, breath, soul, was just outside, trembling under the weight of everything they had both survived. He stood there for 29 minutes, not pacing, not hiding, just standing, frozen between worlds. The house across the street was small, pale yellow, with a porch that sagged slightly to the left and a wind chime that clicked gently in the summer air. The curtains didn't move. The lights inside were on. He knew she was there. He had seen her silhouette pass the window twice. He wondered if she felt him somehow, through the glass, through the street, through the years. His hands were buried in the pockets of his jacket, his shoulders tense, jaw locked. He told himself this was just another building, just another door. But his heart knew better. It beat in patterns he hadn't felt since childhood. Patterns shaped by lullabies, soft touches, whispered stories at bedtime. His feet felt glued to the pavement. Behind him, the world kept moving. Cars passed, birds chirped, life indifferent to the boy standing on the edge of his history. He looked down at his hands, older now, larger, calloused. Would she recognize them? Would she reach for them? Would he let her? Inside, Maria was still sitting, but her body was electric. She hadn't moved from the couch in over an hour, but her every nerve was on fire. The moment was too large, too loaded, too sacred to act upon. She had rehearsed 1,000 greetings in her head. Should she cry? Should she smile? Should she run to him? No. She had decided that when the time came, she would let him lead. She would open the door and wait. Not fill the air with noise, not crush him with affection. She would be the doorway, not the flood. And yet every cell in her screamed to hold him, to bury her face in his shoulder, to inhale the years she'd missed. She stood, slowly, walked to the front door, stopped, took one breath, then another, then another. Her hand touched the doorknob. Across the street, Daniel saw the door open. Light spilled onto the porch. A figure appeared, still, waiting. He took one step forward, then another. The distance shrank like paper in fire. His body moved, but his mind screamed. Every step echoed with doubt. This is a mistake. This isn't real. She won't know me. I won't know her. This is too much. But he kept walking, not because he believed it would be okay, but because some things must be done even in fear, especially in fear. Maria stepped out onto the porch, hands at her sides, eyes wide but soft. She didn't speak. Her mouth trembled. Her heart slammed against her ribs. He was taller than she remembered. Of course, his hair different, posture guarded. But it was him, her son, her boy, her blood. She wanted to say his name but couldn't. Her lips failed her. So she just looked, not scanning, not verifying, just receiving. He reached the bottom step, stopped, looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment the world bent. The years fell away. Time collapsed. There was only this, a woman and a boy, now a man, standing at the edge of their own legend. A story broken, a thread reknotted, and still neither moved. Then he did something small, something enormous. He stepped onto the first stair. Maria didn't breathe. Another stair. Still no words. Another. Now he was face to face with her, close enough to feel her breath. He looked down at her hands. She hadn't raised them. She waited. She didn't reach. She honored the silence. Then quietly he said, "You look smaller." She laughed. It burst out of her like a gasp. And in that crack of laughter, tears surged. He looked at her again, longer this time. And she saw it happen. The softening, the collapsing, the part of him that had been held in tension for 15 years, finally exhaling. He took the last step, stood directly in front of her, not hugging, not speaking, just existing finally, in the same space. Then, gently, cautiously, awkwardly, he opened his arms. She didn't hesitate. She fell into them like water into a vessel. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't cinematic. Her knees gave out. His arms weren't sure what to do. They held each other like survivors, not lovers, not friends, but two halves of the same earthquake, shaking, holding, breathing, saying nothing, because everything was being said in the weight of their bodies against each other. She sobbed against his chest, deep guttural sobs that came from the marrow. He held her, not tightly, not perfectly, but wholly. He closed his eyes, smelled her hair. Something in him broke and healed in the same instant. A sound escaped his throat, not a word. Just a sound, a memory, a release. They stayed like that for a long time, until their shadows shifted, until their breathing matched, until the wind chimes stopped moving. And then she whispered, "Welcome home." He nodded against her shoulder, and for the first time in 15 years, Daniel Morales, son, ghost, survivor, allowed himself to believe it. The morning after their reunion was quiet, almost suspiciously so, like the world had held its breath in reverence and was now too cautious to exhale. Maria woke early. She hadn't really slept, not fully. Her body had rested, but her mind had paced all night through decades of memories and minutes of new images that refused to organize themselves into anything coherent. She had fallen asleep on the couch after they sat for hours saying very little. Daniel had taken the guest room. She had shown it to him wordlessly, pointing at the door, the bed freshly made, the stack of clean towels. He had nodded, walked in, closed the door. No hug this time, no good night, just silence. That silence lingered like perfume in the house. A new presence, a new gravity. Maria stood in the kitchen now, barefoot, making coffee. Every movement felt sacred and terrifying. Should she knock? Should she let him sleep? Should she cook something? Should she pretend this was normal? Nothing was normal. Her hands shook as she cracked the eggs. She dropped one. The yolk spread across the counter like blood in a memory. She stared at it, dazed, then wiped it away. The sound of footsteps startled her. She turned, clutching a dish towel like armor. Daniel stood in the doorway, hair messy, eyes still swollen with sleep and something deeper, something ancient. He looked older this morning, less of a boy. More of the man time had forced him to become. He didn't speak, neither did she. But she offered a soft smile. "Coffee?" she asked, voice barely audible. He nodded, sat down at the small table, eyes scanning the room as if trying to remember a place he'd never truly known. They ate in near silence, toast, eggs, sips of coffee. Occasionally their eyes met, then quickly retreated. Maria tried not to cry. She tried not to stare. She tried to breathe like it was just another Tuesday morning. But inside, every moment was volcanic. She studied his hands, large, veined, strong, so unlike the chubby fingers she remembered, yet she recognized the curve of the knuckles, the scar on the wrist. She wanted to reach out, touch them, trace them like maps, but she didn't. She couldn't. He was still a stranger, and yet not. That paradox hung over every bite. After breakfast, he stood and murmured, "I'll go for a walk." She nodded. "There's a park 2 blocks down." He didn't respond, just left. The door closed gently behind him. Maria stood in the silence, her hands still wrapped around the coffee mug, long after the heat had disappeared. She didn't follow. She didn't watch from the window. She just stood there, grounded in a truth she hadn't known how to name until now. Love is not rescue. Love is waiting. Daniel walked without knowing where he was going. The streets were unfamiliar, but the air was different than he remembered from other places. Softer, quieter, less heavy. He passed people walking dogs, a man watering his lawn, children riding bikes. None of them looked at him twice. That was a strange relief. For so long he had been seen either as a case number or a lost cause. Here he was invisible, free. He sat on a bench under a tree and let the sun touch his face. He closed his eyes, breathed, tried to feel something, anything. But the numbness was still there, not from her, not anymore, but from himself. He didn't know how to be. He didn't know how to receive what she was offering. He wasn't sure he deserved it. When he returned hours later, Maria was in the backyard watering her plants. She looked up, startled, then smiled. "I made lasagna," she said, almost apologetically. "You used to love it, but maybe you don't anymore. That's okay." He didn't answer, just stood there watching her as the hose dripped onto the soil. Finally he said, "I remember the smell." She nodded, tears threatening again. "It's yours if you want." He walked inside. She followed. The meal was awkward, tender, full of forks scraping plates and eyes avoiding each other. He ate slowly. She watched too closely. At one point she asked, "Can I show you some photos?" He paused, then nodded. They sat on the couch. She pulled out the old box again, the one that had started it all. Slowly, reverently, she laid them out like relics. Birthdays, holidays, moments frozen in faded gloss. Daniel leaned forward, picking up one. "That was the treehouse, right?" he asked. Her eyes lit up. "Yes, you helped me paint it." He stared at the image, a wrinkle in his brow. "I thought I dreamed that." "No," she whispered. "It was real." And something in that broke through. They spent the next hour going through every photo. He asked questions, she told stories. He didn't smile often, but his eyes softened. At one point, she pointed at a blurry figure in the background. "That was your best friend, Leo." He blinked. "I remember that name. He had the green bike." Exactly. They were rebuilding memory like archaeologists, brushing dust from bones, reconstructing life from shards. It was fragile, imperfect, but it was theirs. That night, as she passed his room, she stopped. The door was half open. He was sitting on the bed, staring out the window. She knocked softly. "Good night," she said. He didn't look at her, but after a long pause he replied, "Good night, Mom." She stepped away, heart caving in, not from sadness, but from the unbearable beauty of hearing that word again, spoken not with certainty, not with comfort, but with effort, with truth. Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor like liquid forgiveness. The house was still, the kind of stillness that isn't empty, but full of presence, of breath, of things too fragile to name. Maria stood at the sink, hands submerged in warm water, washing 2 coffee cups. She had bought a matching set the day after Daniel arrived, not because she believed in sudden healing, but because symbols matter, even if small, even if no one notices. The sound of quiet footsteps behind her didn't startle her this time. She turned slowly, towel in hand. Daniel was there, wearing the same hoodie he'd arrived in, but something in his face had shifted. A softness, a weariness, a readiness. He didn't sit. He just stood there, looking at her like someone measuring the depth of a lake before jumping in. "I want to know," he said. "Everything. About before. About after. About you." Her hands trembled. She set the towel down. "I'll tell you anything you want," she said, "but not all at once. We'll take it slow." He nodded. "Good. Slow is good." That became their rhythm. They spent the next days not as a mother and son reunited, but as two people choosing each other again and again in small ways, in shared meals, in folding laundry, in replanting the flowers in the front yard, in learning to coexist with ghosts, because the past did not vanish. It whispered still, in certain smells, in moments of sudden silence, in the ways they flinched when love came too close. Daniel did not ask to be comforted. Maria did not try to heal what could not be undone. They met in the middle, where memory breaks, but presence remains. Some nights they would sit on the porch in silence, staring at the stars. She would sip tea. He would lean back, hood over his head, eyes skyward. And sometimes, just sometimes, he would speak. "I used to think I was lost," he said one night, his voice low. "Not just from you, from myself. Like I was just floating." Maria nodded slowly. "I know the feeling," she said. "I've lived with it for 15 years. He turned to her, his face half in shadow. "Are we ever not lost?" She smiled, a tired, honest smile. "Maybe being found isn't a place," she said. "Maybe it's a person, or a moment, or a decision to stay." He looked back at the stars. "Then maybe I'll stay for a while." They didn't call it healing. That word felt too clean, too clinical. What they did was rebuild, piece by piece, not erasing the cracks, but honoring them. Like kintsugi, the Japanese art of mending broken pottery with gold, they let the fractures show, not as flaws, but as proof of survival, of return, of love, even in ruins. Months passed. Daniel got a part-time job at a bookstore. He started reading again, slowly, awkwardly. One afternoon, Maria found a copy of The Little Prince on his nightstand, the same book she used to read to him when he was 4. A paper star was tucked into the pages. She said nothing, just smiled and closed the door gently. One Sunday morning, while trimming the hedges, Maria turned to Daniel and asked, "Do you remember what you used to say every night before bed?" He shook his head. She laughed. "You used to say, 'See you in the morning, even if I dream first.'" He didn't laugh, but he smiled and whispered, "I guess we both dreamed a long time." That night, she turned off the lights, checked the locks, made tea. The house was quiet again, but not empty. In the hallway on the wall, there was a new photo, a recent one. Maria and Daniel sitting side by side on the porch, both unsmiling but not sad. Just present, real. Because not all stories end in closure. Some end in continuation, in waking up, day after day, and choosing each other again. In the long, slow work of trust, in learning that being found doesn't mean being whole, just being seen fully, finally. And sometimes that's more than enough.